Hey there, this video is all about the Sony 24-70 G Master Mark II and how it compares with the original version. And before we get into it, I just want to speak for a moment about the importance and versatility of a 24-70 f2.8 zoom lens. In my opinion, it's the most important lens for any camera system, and if you were to pick one lens to have in your bag, I would guess for most people this would be it. It's super versatile because of the focal range from 24-70. I've used this on lots of different projects, from documentaries to interviews to even filming myself on the wide end. Having an f2.8 aperture is also really helpful, and the 24-70 f2.8 is often one of the highest quality zoom lenses that a company does offer. So I have used this lens quite a bit along with other 24-70s. This lens came out in 2016, and I think most people were in agreement that it was time for a refresh. So when the Mark II got announced not too long ago, I was pretty excited about it. So in this video, I really want to go through the physical features and attributes of these lenses. We'll also dive into image quality, autofocus, focus breathing, and just general, how the lenses work. And then we'll talk about price, if you should upgrade or maybe just stick to the original one. Let's start off by talking about the physical attributes of these two lenses. The biggest difference, of course, is going to be the size and the weight. The new G Master is way smaller and way lighter. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you take a look at these two lenses here, you'll see there's a huge difference in terms of size and weight. And anyone that's used the original version, you know how big and how heavy and kind of cumbersome it is. When you put it on the smaller bodies of the Sony cameras, it never felt balanced. It always felt awkward, and there's a lot of strain when you're holding it by the grip. The new 24-70, it really does match it a lot better. It feels balanced. It feels like it's the right size for these smaller Sony bodies. So let's go through the physical attributes here. They both have 82mm filter threads. Neither of them have stabilization in the lens, but the original G Master here kind of is a no-frills design. It does have the customizable button that you can set up through the camera. It has the normal autofocus, manual focus switch, and then it has a lock here, which locks the zoom for traveling. That's about it. Very, very simple. Never had any complaints. Build quality is awesome. The focus throw and the zoom are both great. Now, the new G Master has a couple of neat features on it. Of course, it still has the customizable button, but actually has two. So when you're shooting in portrait or landscape, you can easily access the button. Has your autofocus, manual focus switch. One of the neat new features is this switch here, which goes from smooth to tight. Smooth setting, this is for the zoom. It kind of operates like any other zoom lens, and when you push it over to tight, there's a lot more friction. It's a little bit harder to operate, and I think this will allow you to get more precise control if you're zooming, especially for video. It's kind of neat. I've never seen this before. It's a new feature in these lenses. I've never once thought, hey, I'd love to adjust the friction of my zoom, but hey, they're trying out new stuff. It's pretty cool. Like a lot of the new Sony lenses, there's the aperture control on the lens. I actually don't like these. I never use them. Some people do love them. I always control the aperture on the camera. I just gotten used to it, and then any camera I pick up, I can use it that way. I also tend to not use the control ring on the Canon RF lenses either, but that's just me. So if you want to control the aperture from the lens, you can just turn this. You can hear that it's clicking. But you can turn the click on and off here. So if you're shooting in video mode and you want a smooth transition while you're changing your aperture like you would on a cine lens, you have that option. If you don't want to use this, you can set it to the A, and that'll allow the camera to control the aperture. But the nice feature that I'm really, really happy that Sony added is this iris lock. So when you put this on, then it locks the iris in, and you can't change it, which is great because on other lenses that have this control, I'll bump this accidentally, and all of a sudden I'm shooting at f16, and I don't even know why I'm shooting at f16, and I can't change it in the camera, and it's frustrating. So I like how you can lock it in, and then it doesn't really exist. But with these new features, you are paying for these. So if these are things that you're not super interested in, they may not be selling points for you in terms of upgrading or maybe choosing the new version over the old version. In terms of close focusing, the new one is a little bit closer at 0.69 to 0.99 feet, and the old lens is 1.25 feet. So you'll get a little bit more close focusing distance out of the new version. Now let's get into talking about image quality, which is the most important thing of any lens. So for these tests, what I did is I used my Sony FX3. I shot everything in XAVC SI 4K in S-Log 3. That's the maximum quality that I can get out of this camera. And when I did these tests, I set up the camera on the tripod and just swapped the lenses. I also used the same ND filter on both lenses. I tried to get the exposure as close as I could in the camera. I graded for one of them and then copied the grade onto the other one. I only made slight adjustments in the exposure if I needed to get them to match, but I didn't change really the contrast, saturation, and the color grade. So I want you to see sort of the differences between them. So for all these examples, I'll show each clip for a few seconds and then I'll label them so you can kind of guess as you watch them. So take a look. Now, overall, I am really surprised by the results from this. I know there has been a lot of hype about this new lens, but frankly, I don't see much of a difference between the two lenses optically. I think the colors are just slightly different, but I think in general, I would say if I had to make a statement about the image quality between these two lenses, is that the G Master 2 has slightly more contrast than the original version, but the original version has a little bit more saturation. So if you take a look at this example here, this is coming right out of the camera, the G Master has just slightly more contrast, but then once you grade them, they kind of look the same. So to me, the color difference or the contrast is really not a big deal. You can grade them to look exactly the same. I didn't find the new lens to be much sharper than the old lens. And in terms of the bokeh, if you look at this shot here of my truck and you look in the background, they look pretty similar to me. So again, you could do some pixel peeping and looking at test charts and stuff like that, which is important to really know the differences between the two lenses. But overall use in a real world situation, frankly, I really can't see much of a difference in terms of image quality between these two lenses. Seeing that the image quality isn't very different between these two lenses, there's a couple other things I want to test in terms of video features for these lenses. So first is autofocus. From this test, I think that the autofocus was pretty similar between these two lenses. Again, a little surprised. Not that I ever had a problem with the autofocus performance on the original version, but I was hoping maybe it would be a little bit faster, a little bit snappier, but again, very, very similar. Now let's take a look at focus breathing. You can see from that example that the focus breathing is more minimized and controlled on the Mark II, so that's definitely a nice upgrade if you're shooting video. Now let's get into talking about the cost of these two lenses and my recommendations. The Mark II is selling new right now for $2,300, which yes, is a very expensive lens, but it's a very versatile lens and it's also a very premium lens. Now this is comparable to the offering from Canon. Their RF 24-70 f2.8 is $2,400, so definitely in that ballpark. Now the first version, they're still selling new for $1,900. So If you are going to buy a new lens, I'd recommend the Mark II. And if you're dropping around $2,000 on a lens, I think an extra $400 gives you a lot for this lens and is definitely going to be more future-proof. Now, what makes this interesting is the fact that, as I said, this lens came out in 2016, so there's a lot of used copies on the market. You can get a really clean copy of this lens for right now around $1,300 or $1,400, and that's why it's so interesting, because the image quality, the optics, the sharpness, and the bokeh are very similar between these two lenses. You can definitely get a nice bargain on the Mark I. If you don't have either of these two lenses and you're more on a budget, I don't think you go wrong with the Mark I, as I said, because the image looks so similar between these two lenses. Now, I was a little bit bummed out about the Mark II not being a lot better than the Mark I. I had a lot of high hopes for it, but I think that really goes to show for the fact that the Mark I was already such a great starting point. It's such a great lens. Now, the other curveball here is going to be the Sigma 24-70 f2.8, which is a fantastic lens. I know everyone that owns that lens loves it. I've always preferred the G Master over it, and now that this has dropped so much in price for a used copy, you might want to pick that up. But again, if you have the Sigma or either of these lenses, you're not going to be upset. They're all awesome lenses. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you did, please consider hitting subscribe down below. I cover Canon and Sony. There's a lot of content coming up about videography, content creation, and of course, camera gear. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.